Under the searing Arizona sun, Rachel Adams stepped through the security gate of Silverwing Airfield, her worn canvas sneakers crunching softly against the manicured tarmac. She wore a faded white t-shirt, jeans frayed at the knees, and carried an old olive tote bag that had clearly weathered time and miles. Around her, Silverwing gleamed like a showroom, its chrome hangers polished to a mirror, finished private jets parked like trophies, and influencers already broadcasting live from the tarmac in tailored jumpsuits. The camp was a sanctuary for the privileged, where wealth dictated wingspan and heritage was mistaken for skill. Rachel, with her quiet presence and humble attire, looked like a ghost from another world, one the elite didn't want to acknowledge, let alone accept. The first sting came from the security guard, a burly man in aviators, who didn't bother to hide his smirk. "Lose your way, sweetheart. This is a pilot's academy, not a tire shop." Without waiting for a reply, he waved her toward the exit. But Rachel, undeterred, walked past him with silent defiance, her eyes locked straight ahead. The moment was captured on camera by a nearby trainee influencer whose stream chat erupted with laughter. From the observation lounge, snickers bounced like echoes across the sleek hangar walls. Her presence was an interruption to their perfect tableau, a dent in their illusion of exclusivity. As Rachel approached the central check-in desk, whispers followed her like exhaust trails. Trust fund cadets and corporate heirs nudged each other, their eyes narrowing with glee. "Is she delivering something?" one muttered, nudging her friend. Another, draped in a sponsored bomber jacket, whispered loud enough for the cameras to hear, "She must be lost. Look at that tote, looks like it came from a thrift store fire sale." Their words weren't just cruel, they were calculated, designed to sting. And they did not just to Rachel, but to everyone watching the live stream audiences at home, who began feeling something far stronger than second-hand embarrassment anger. Rachel stepped up to the counter with her application folded crisply despite the abuse. The registration clerk, a woman with a platinum ponytail and eyes sharpened from years of elitist conditioning, looked at her paper without unfolding it. "You must be joking," she said flatly, before turning her back and laughing with a group of trainees nearby. Cameras zoomed in. "Thrift store thinks she can fly," lit up as a trending tag on their feed. Meanwhile, Rachel stood motionless, her expression unreadable, her silence louder than any argument she could have made. And still she waited for acknowledgement, for fairness, for a chance. The humiliation didn't stop there. A drone camera buzzed down from above to capture the so-called grease monkey trying to register for the elite Silverwing program. One of the influencers, clad in a gold-trimmed flight suit, mockingly narrated her presence like it was a comedy sketch. "Look, folks, the janitor's applying for Top Gun," he laughed. Laughter erupted from the group, and the clip was instantly uploaded to social media, where the ridicule continued. It wasn't just a rejection, it was a broadcasted execution of dignity. And yet, Rachel didn't break. Her hands didn't tremble as she placed the application down. She didn't flinch when a bottle cap landed near her shoes. She didn't speak when another influencer waved her off like a pest. She simply stood there, grounded, not by their permission, but by her own sense of purpose. The audience watching from afar didn't see a lost woman. They saw something that Silverwing didn't resolve, wrapped in silence and dignity, armored in restraint. By the time Rachel moved to the hangar for orientation, the mood had shifted from mockery to theater. It was no longer a few sneers, it was a full production. Influencers, trainees, and private jet heirs formed semicircles around her, like vultures around roadkill. Each insult was more elaborate than the last. "Did your tote bag come with a coupon for humiliation?" joked one. "No," said another. "It came with a one-way ticket to disappointment." The laughter echoed across the steel walls, bouncing off engines and simulator bays like war drums for a battle she didn't even get to fight. Ashley Whitmore entered with her usual fanfare, daughter of the airfield's chairman, adorned in a custom flight suit stitched with her family crest. Her diamond-studded aviators glinted as she sized up Rachel like a curiosity at a zoo exhibit. "Oh, darling," Ashley said, "this isn't a soup kitchen. This is Silverwing. You don't just walk in with clearance from Goodwill." Her entourage howled with delight as Ashley strutted past Rachel, deliberately brushing her shoulder. A water bottle rolled near Rachel's foot. Oops, someone smirked. Watch out for oil stains. Even the instructors tasked with professionalism weren't immune to the contagious disdain. Captain Travis Dalton walked by with his clipboard and made a theatrical show of glancing at her application, then pretending to hold back laughter. You sure this wasn't meant for sanitation training? He chuckled to a group of cadets. Cameras caught every second. Live commentary spliced her presence with memes. Janitor joins the jet set trended by noon. To them, she wasn't a threat, she was content. Rachel's silence was their oxygen. They mistook it for fear. They misread it as surrender. What they didn't understand was that silence could also be a storm-gathering power. Every insult, every eye roll, every tweet, they weren't erasing her. They were engraving their own shame into the airfield's history. The more they tried to bury her with ridicule, the deeper they dug their own fall from grace. At any point, Rachel could have walked out. She had every reason to. No one would have blamed her. But instead, she stood near the simulator lineup, scanning the schedule board, pretending not to hear the whispers, pretending not to feel the sting of their words. Her restraint was her rebellion. Her refusal to give them the reaction they wanted was her power. Those watching the feed from home weren't laughing. They weren't mocking. They were simmering with something fierce. This wasn't just bullying, it was arrogance on parade. And Rachel Adams, in her silence, had become a mirror held up to the worst of them. They didn't just want to mock Rachel, they wanted to destroy her. When her name was called for simulator testing, a small group of trainees led by a smug cadet named Brandon Cross approached the control booth. They whispered to the tech staff, made some adjustments to the settings, and loaded her pod with the worst turbulence profile available. They desynced the response time, tampered with the radar input, and muted her audio. It wasn't a test. It was an ambush. Rachel entered the simulator without complaint, strapping in and adjusting the controls like a pro. The moment the simulation began, the pod bucked like a bronco. Desert winds screamed through her earpiece. The visuals jittered. The radar blinked false threats. Still, she held her posture. Outside, the trainees watched from a live feed as the on-screen Rachel nosedived into a virtual cactus. Did she just crash into a tumbleweed? Someone shouted. The hangar roared with laughter. Captain Dalton stood at the center of it all, watching with arms crossed and an expression of manufactured disappointment. As the simulation ended with critical failure flashing in red, Dalton approached the feed station. Without hesitation, he pulled her application off the clipboard, tore it in two, and tossed it into the trash can. "We don't train janitors to fly," he said. The crowd erupted in cheers. The clip hit social media before Rachel even exited the pod. Emerging from the simulator, her face calm but pale, Rachel said nothing. Not a protest, not a glance at Dalton. She simply picked up her bag from the floor, wiped a drop of condensation from her nose, and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps were slow, not heavy, and her shoulders didn't slump. They squared. For those who watched live, the sabotage was obvious, the humiliation too cruel, and Rachel's quiet retreat too heartbreaking. The comment sections overflowed with outrage, but she wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. As Rachel made her way toward the exit gate, her name already trending for all the wrong reasons, the final wall of humiliation waited for her. A group of aviation journalists, clearly briefed on the spectacle, gathered with designer notebooks and smug grins. One of them, a man with silver hair and a Mont Blanc pen, approached her like a predator savoring the end. "Crash test dummy thinks she deserves a microphone." "Now," he jeered. The cameras rolled, his followers cheered. The others joined in, tossing sarcastic questions like daggers. "Did you pack up your pride with that tote? Is the tarmac slippery from your tears?" Their words, sharpened by privilege, cut through the air with brutal efficiency. Rachel didn't answer. She didn't even blink. Her tote rested gently against her side, soaked at the bottom from a water bottle, still dripping with cruelty. Her shoes left damp prints behind her. The audience online was no longer amused. They were furious. Furious at the journalists, furious at Silverwing, furious at a system so eager to cheer for collapse. Rachel's silence had become sacred, her calm a protest, her quiet departure a rebellion in plain sight. As she passed through the final gate, someone threw a crumpled press pass at her feet. "You'll need that at your next job interview. Maybe janitorial staff at McCarran Airport," a voice shouted. More laughter, more clicks, more humiliation broadcast for the world to see. Rachel didn't respond. Not with words, not with glares. Her silence was final. But as the gate closed behind her, the storm she carried was already building, quiet, deliberate, and destined to return. Silverwing hadn't seen the last of her, and when she came back, the sky itself would tremble. The next morning dawned golden and still. Over Silverwing Airfield, the sky, a quiet canvas awaiting its masterpiece. VIP guests sipped champagne beneath canopies, stitched with corporate logos, their tailored suits gleaming under the desert sun. Jet engines purred in the background as media crews aligned their cameras for the day's flight demo, a carefully choreographed spectacle meant to flaunt the elite's dominion over the sky. But as the announcer cued the first aircraft, a sudden, piercing roar sliced through the silence. Heads snapped upward, a silver blur streaked across the horizon, descending fast and low. The radar scrambled to register its ID, but it wasn't on the schedule. It wasn't on the invite list. It wasn't supposed to exist here. The jet broke through the clouds like a thunderbolt, an F-22 Raptor, silent until it wasn't then louder than God's own fist. Its afterburners blazed blue-white fire across the Arizona sky, sending ripples through the crowd's polished calm. The aircraft made 3 surgical passes over the runway, each one more precise than the last, its wingtip rolls slicing arrogance from the air. Dust kicked up in violent curtains as the Raptor flared for a landing. With one final sweep, its tires kissed the tarmac so gently it was as if the earth had bowed in welcome. The canopy hissed open, and from within emerged a figure dressed not in rags, but in gleaming flight gear, the kind reserved for legends. Rachel Adams pulled off her oxygen mask, her face carved in quiet defiance. Her flight suit bore no insignia, no rank, only a patch that read, "Ghost Hawk." The crowd stood frozen. Executives, trainees, influencers, all watching as she climbed down the ladder with the same unhurried grace she had walked through their jeers the day before. From a nearby Black Hawk helicopter, a towering figure stepped onto the runway. General Walter Hamilton, commander of the Western Aviation Command, raised a microphone to his lips. "Ladies and gentlemen," he thundered, his voice sweeping across the tarmac like a call to arms. "Meet Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Adams, record-holding combat pilot leader of the Ghost Hawk Squadron and principal investor of the Silverwing Foundation." Silence fell like a guillotine. Gasps rippled through the air like shockwaves. Rachel stood center stage not by invitation, but by right. The press cameras zoomed in with trembling lenses. Those who had mocked her now clutched their notepads like lifeboats. Ashley Whitmore lowered her diamond-studded aviators, her face paling with every syllable of Rachel's introduction. Hashtags flipped in real time. Tire shop, pilot vanished beneath a surge of new ones. Shuck Raptor Queen, Silent Ace, Silverwing Reborn. The elite who had so confidently dismissed her now stood in the shadows of her thunder. As the Raptor's engine powered down, the gravity of Rachel's presence settled over the crowd like a solar eclipse. Out of the VIP tent stepped Colonel Frank Matthews, retired war hero and former head of Joint Strike Operations, his medals clinking softly against his pressed blazer. He crossed the tarmac with a slow, purposeful stride and stopped before Rachel, removing his cap. 16 continuous hours in combat flight, he said, his voice resonant and proud. Leader of a unit that never lost a pilot, and today a masterclass in grace under fire. He reached into his coat and revealed a framed plaque, the Distinguished Service Citation usually delivered at Pentagon ceremonies, now bestowed in front of those who had tried to bury her. Rachel accepted the citation with a nod, but her expression remained stoic. She didn't bask in applause. She simply held the plaque close to her chest, a quiet salute to those who had believed in her long before anyone at Silverwing did. The audience, which had once mocked her tote bag and worn sneakers, now clung to every movement she made. Behind them, the same digital feeds that had live-streamed her humiliation now broadcast her vindication. In homes, offices, and hangars across the country, viewers watched in stunned silence as their understanding of strength and status was rewritten in real time. Ashley Whitmore stood still, her smirk gone, her confidence draining like air from a deflated fuselage. She was no longer the queen of Silverwing, just a footnote in Rachel's skybound narrative. Her entourage retreated quietly, their eyes averted. Rachel didn't need to look their way. Her very existence now was the loudest answer she could give. The hashtag Raptor Queen surged past 1 million mentions, spreading not as a brand, but as a banner of redemption. Colonel Matthews saluted her again, his voice carrying one final tribute. What we witnessed today was not a stunt. It was a reckoning. A woman stripped of dignity yesterday has returned wearing the wings of justice. The crowd erupted not in polite applause, but in awe. Even the most jaded moguls found themselves nodding. Something had changed, not just at Silverwing, but in aviation itself. Rachel turned to face the gathered staff, her expression sharpening like a steel blade pulled from velvet. "Captain Travis Dalton," she called, her voice finally breaking its silence. The crowd parted as Dalton stepped forward, still trying to muster a sneer. Rachel didn't blink. "You violated every principle of mentorship and honor this academy claims to represent." She pulled a document from her flight vest. "Effective immediately, you are dismissed. Your name will not be remembered here." Dalton's smirk withered. The cameras caught his stunned face as the paper was handed to General Hamilton for enforcement. Then she turned to Ashley, who hadn't moved a step. Ashley Whitmore Rachel said, not with anger, but with piercing calm, "Your father may have owned the chairs in this tent, but I own the runway beneath them." She reached into her pocket and produced a second document. "Effective today, I'm acquiring 80% of Silverwing's assets and operations. And you," she said with finality, "are no longer welcome on my airfield." The expulsion wasn't loud. It was surgical, and it cut deeper than rage ever could. Murmurs turned into roars. Executives scrambled to distance themselves from Dalton and Ashley. Trainees who once sneered now stood, rigid eyes cast down. Rachel wasn't here for revenge. She was here to cleanse. The arrogance that once flew freely in Silverwing's skies now found itself grounded. The very air pulsed with a different rhythm, a rhythm set by a woman who'd been called a joke and returned as a storm. The press, once vicious in their derision, now scrambled for new metaphors. The silent ace, the woman who owned the sky. Rachel Adams, America's last jet whisperer. They weren't just writing headlines, they were documenting a shift in power, in legacy, in what it meant to fly. Rachel didn't acknowledge them. She didn't need to. Her silence was now sacred. In the days that followed, accolades poured in like sunlight after a storm. Top aviation experts across the globe issued public statements praising Rachel's composure, precision, and combat record. Lockheed Martin announced they would dedicate an entire research wing in her honor, the Adams Division, to further stealth and precision aviation. The FAA, citing her 16-hour combat flight and recovery under duress, declared a new annual Pilot Safety Award, the Rachel Adams Citation for Flight Excellence. Museums lined up for interviews. The Smithsonian Air and Space Museum confirmed a permanent exhibit to feature her flight suit, her Raptor footage, and even her battered tote bag, no longer a symbol of ridicule, but of resilience. Every detail of her comeback was studied not for spectacle, but for inspiration. Schools began teaching her flight as case study. Air academies began replacing outdated leadership manuals with her story. Rachel, the woman they called the tire shop pilot, had reshaped the narrative of flight. Test pilots from across the world requested to visit Silverwing not to train, but to learn from the ghost who had silenced a runway. Combat veterans called her landing the most dignified act of quiet vengeance in aviation history. Every institution that had once doubted her now clamored for a seat at her table. Rachel gave no interviews, posed for no covers, and accepted no endorsement deals. She simply kept flying. Her academy reopened under new guidance, merit-based, free for underprivileged youth, and staffed with instructors selected for character, not lineage. The jets, once reserved for heirs and influencers, now carried first-generation cadets through their first flights. Rachel didn't just rewrite Silverwing's future, she ignited its soul. And through it all, she remained silent. Not because she couldn't speak, but because the sky spoke louder now, with her name written across it. The fallout from Rachel Adams' return was swift, public, and unforgiving. Within hours of her F-22 landing and General Hamilton's announcement, the internet erupted with fury, directed not at Rachel, but at the elitist trainees and influencers who had tried to destroy her. Screenshots of their jeers, videos of their cruelty, and hashtags, once meant to mock her, were now reposted with scathing commentary. Sponsors pulled contracts, brand deals collapsed. Trust fund cadets found their names blacklisted from aviation academies across the country. No longer the shining faces of privilege, they were now cautionary tales. They weren't just unfollowed, they were erased. Captain Travis Dalton's fall was perhaps the most dramatic. Once a respected instructor and self-declared gatekeeper of Silverwing, his name vanished overnight from directories, event programs, and speaking panels. Aviation forums scrubbed his credentials. Former colleagues disavowed him. And in a symbolic act that went viral, his Silverwing-issued flight cap was auctioned online under the title Relic of a Fallen Era. The comments were ruthless, but not undeserved. He hadn't just failed Rachel, he had failed the very code he was sworn to uphold, and the industry would not forget. Ashley Whitmore, once the untouchable heiress of the Whitmore aviation dynasty, watched her empire implode in real time. Social media turned on her with the same speed and venom she had once weaponized. Hashtags like Jerk Diamond Descent and Jockey Ashley Down trended globally. Invitations to exclusive events were rescinded. Her modeling contracts evaporated. Family board members distanced themselves. The high towers of socialite influence she had built on arrogance and exclusion crumbled to dust beneath the weight of public reckoning. Her father, despite his power, could not shield her from the fury she had earned. The very culture that Silverwing had thrived on, entitlement legacy, admission aesthetic over ability, was now radioactive. No one wanted to be associated with what it once stood for. The airfield, once a glittering shrine to privilege, now wore the bruises of its collapse. You could feel it in the silence of the hangars, in the eyes of the remaining staff who had stayed quiet while injustice reigned. For them, Rachel's return hadn't just been an embarrassment, it had been a mirror. And while the guilty shrank into silence, the world leaned in closer. Because in the vacuum left behind, a new voice was beginning to rise, not loud, not boastful, but powerful in its clarity. It wasn't revenge that reshaped Silverwing, it was truth. And the truth was that a woman in frayed jeans had walked into the kingdom of the elite and shattered it, not with anger, but with precision silence and the unshakable strength of being right. Rachel never called for their punishment. She didn't post or parade. She simply walked away from the wreckage she didn't cause but had to clean, and the world watched with the kind of respect that doesn't fade after the headlines. Weeks after the storm, Rachel returned not to celebrate, but to rebuild. She held no press conference, no party, no ribbon-cutting ceremony. Instead, she stood before the skeleton of the airfield with a clipboard in one hand and blueprints in the other. Silverwing will become something new, she said, her voice quiet but resolute. An academy where skill is earned, not inherited, where dreams are trained, not mocked. And with that, the rebirth of Silverwing began, not from its hangars, but from its purpose. The new Silverwing Academy was announced as a combat-level aviation school, but one with a radical mission. Admissions would be merit-based only. There would be no seats for billionaires' children, no legacy enrollments, no influencer campaigns. Instead, seats would be reserved for veterans, underprivileged youth scholarship winners, and anyone with the courage to earn their place. Flight would no longer be a privilege granted by wealth, it would be a frontier reclaimed by grit. The transformation was sweeping. Gold-plated plaques were taken down, sponsor banners removed. The hangars once filled with private jets were now retooled with training aircraft. Former cadets who had bullied their way through the program were denied re-entry. Their names carried no weight in this new world. The message was clear. This sky belongs to the ones who fight for it, not the ones who bought it. Rachel handpicked every new instructor, not by their resume's gloss, but by their character. Many were veterans like her. Others were pilots who'd once been overlooked because they didn't look the part or come from the right background. Every class was built from scratch, focused on discipline, ethics, and technical mastery. No student flew until they understood that dignity was part of the flight protocol. As the first cohort took to the skies, people gathered to watch, not because it was a spectacle, but because it was a symbol. Young men and women, many flying for the first time, launched into the Arizona blue with tears in their eyes and purpose in their hearts. Every takeoff wasn't just a maneuver, it was an uprising, a rejection of the old guard, a celebration of the new. And Rachel. She stood beneath the control tower, hands behind her back, eyes on the horizon. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Silverwing was no longer an airfield for the elite. It was a sanctuary for the ones who had always believed the sky was theirs too. Rachel's F-22 landing became a story retold in every corner of the globe. It wasn't just about aviation anymore. It was about resilience, about justice, about what happens when you dare to return where you were never welcomed and make that place yours. Documentaries aired. Books were written. Museums curated entire exhibits around her gear, her mission, and the moment she touched down in that Raptor. Children drew pictures of her. Young girls asked for flight lessons. Veterans cried, and influencers disappeared. The Arizona plains, once a proving ground for arrogance, were now something else entirely, a crucible for grit, sweat, and second chances. The skyline above Silverwing wasn't dotted with private jets anymore. It was shaped by real pilots, real dreams, and real freedom. Rachel's vision had not only been built, it had taken flight, and the air around it buzzed with something new respect. Before leaving for a training deployment, Rachel held a short ceremony with the first graduating class. Her words were few. "I wasn't here to fit in," she said, her voice steady. "I was here to clean house." She paused, letting that sentence sink into the crowd like a lightning strike. Then she turned to face the camera, her flight suit pressed, her oxygen mask hanging at her side. And sometimes she added, "To clean you, start by taking out the trash." The line went viral instantly. Not as a quote, but as a reckoning. A warning to every gatekeeper, every bully in a uniform, every empire built on exclusion. That the quiet ones you laugh at might one day come back not with anger, but with wings. As she boarded her jet and the engines rumbled to life, the crowd below broke into spontaneous applause. But Rachel didn't wave. She didn't smile. She looked ahead, beyond the airfield, beyond the cameras, to a sky that no longer needed permission. Her legacy wasn't in the applause. It was in the silence she left behind, the kind that reshaped everything. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something deep, powerful, and unshakable, then you're in the right place. At Deep Inside HQ, we don't just tell stories. We unearth the truth hidden beneath silence, the strength disguised as humility, and the power of those who rise without ever raising their voice. Subscribe to our channel to experience more stories like Rachel Adams' stories that will challenge you, inspire you, and remind you what courage truly looks like. Like this video if you believe the sky should belong to the deserving, not the entitled. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that dignity doesn't need a microphone. And if you've ever been underestimated, this channel was made for you.